we enjoyed his presence. He lived across the street at Capri, and it's very sad that he's passed away yesterday. So we'll dedicate the shiur to his honor and to his memory. And we are grateful for the years that he was a member of our program, and we're very sorry that he's no longer with us. Okay, Baruch Dayan Emes. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are live and alive. Is that true? We can't just be live. We have to be alive. Yes? Okay, good. Can everybody see on the screen? Yeah, it is a little bit funny looking. I don't know why when we go live on these things, it gets a little bit funny looking, but all right, even if it's funny looking, at least we're here together. We're learning, we're engaging, we're participating. And today's shiur, we're going to talk about the parsha of Bo. What's Bo? Let's get it. What? Do you want to give the shiur? So please, let's just work together. Thank you. We don't want the interruptions. It doesn't work. I will open the floor. So Parshas Bo, I would say, is the grand finale of the Egypt story. If you've been paying attention to the Parshas for the last few weeks, you saw after months of stubbornness, Pharaoh finally gets the message. And last week we read Va'era, which starts off with a Vav and ends with an Aleph. What's the numerical value? Vav is 6, Aleph is 1, equals 7. 7 plagues in last week's Parsha. The Parsha of Bo starts with an Aleph, with a Beis, which is 2, Aleph, which is 1, equals 3. So we have 3 plagues in our Parsha, and the last 3 plagues strike upon Egypt. And it culminates. We have locusts, darkness, and the death of the firstborn. And at last, finally, Pharaoh says the words every Jew's been waiting for all that time. Bo. No, he doesn't say Bo. He says go. Because Bo is confusing. Bo doesn't mean go, Bo means come. Hashem is saying, come with me. You know that song from Avram Fried? Don't you know you're never alone? It doesn't matter where you are. There's nothing in his eyes more special than you. Wherever you go, Hashem is with you. And don't you know you're never alone? Because Hashem says, Bo, come with me. I'm with you. Okay? So Pharaoh says, go. Some say it was the first recorded case of someone saying, fine, do whatever you want, and actually meaning it. Because after all the back and forth, finally, Pharaoh is chatful of the trouble he's been having and the trouble he's giving the Jews. And he says, all right, you can go. And that's the story where Pharaoh lets the Jewish people go free. But Parshas Bo isn't just about leaving Egypt. Okay, it's about how Jews remember and how Jews live. And there's a lot of points in the Parsha, and we could look at different ones. Today I chose to give you a shiur about darkness, about the second last, plague number 9. And it's a Parsha where we see our very beginning of a people. For example, today is Rosh Chodesh. What's the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh? Sanctifying the new moon, accountability for time, right? So before we even have a country, before we even have an army or a retirement plan, Hashem gives us a calendar. You know why a calendar? Because sometimes the rabbi's shiur is so long that a clock isn't enough. You need a calendar. All right? But Judaism understands something very deep. When you control your time, you control your life. A slave has no accountability for time. A slave doesn't have control over their time, right? And certainly, we know, especially when you look back at life, you don't measure life by how fast it went, but by the moments that mattered. And so we're also, that's part of the parsha, we're also commanded the matzah, crispy, crunchy, yummy matzah. Why? Because there was no time for the dough to rise, right? And the message is timeless. When Hashem says it's time to move forward, you don't wait for everything to be perfect. Okay, it's not about perfection. You go, right? You understand this. Some of the most important decisions in life were made not because conditions were ideal, or because they were right. We want to do things that are right. Okay? And then comes the powerful instruction on Parsha, V'yigadet levincha, you should tell this to your children. Judaism is the only faith that turns memory into a mitzvah. Into a mitzvah. Not just to remember privately, but to pass it on. Okay? My friends, you are living, walking Haggadahs. You don't need a book. You are the story. That's why we have for you every morning to take some time to write your story so you can pass it on to others. So your story will be remembered. Okay, your children and your grandchildren, they don't just learn from you, but they see how you live. They emulate you. You are their walking, living role models. And Project Pearls is a good way to inspire your family. And I encourage everybody to come earlier each morning, come here at 9 o'clock, grab a nice coffee while it's still hot, and write down some of your reflections, memories, experiences of life, maybe your favorite recipe, maybe your family history, maybe whatever it is. Those green books are there for you to do exactly that. And finally, my friends, Hashem tells the Jewish people to put the blood of the lamb on their doorposts, not for protection from the angel of death, but to show courage, to declare, I'm a Jew and I'm proud, and I'll sing it out loud. Forever, that's what I'll be, right? I'm not hiding it. You know, people think about life across the world. While we have our problems here in South Africa, we won't deny it. It's true. We got problems, right? But you want to compare our problems to the problems other people have? You know, America's got its share of problems, as you easily can see in the news, right? And Europe has got its problems. I think we're very blessed here in South Africa. This place is incredible, and we have to be grateful of our blessings. And why do I think of that? Because you talk about anti-Semitism. The world is rampant with it. And we here in South Africa, no matter what our problems are, and even if it exists here, we can't bury our heads in the sand. Yes, anti-Semitism exists, but it's far less than anywhere else in the world. So I think we're very privileged with what we do have going on here. And be grateful for our blessings. We can be proud of our Judaism. We don't have to hide it, right? And that's what happens, you know, after a lifetime of ups and downs, we realize, you know, we have the strength, we have the courage, we have the dignity, we have the faith. We show up even when it's not easy. So kol hakavod to you, my friends. And I think this week's parsha that we're going to delve into now and look at particularly the plague of darkness reminds us that freedom is not just about leaving Egypt. Okay, it's about living with purpose, memory, faith at every stage of life. While some people, my friends, you know, God took them out of Egypt, but the rest of the work of taking Egypt out of ourselves is up to each of us. Every day we have that opportunity. And if you ever wonder where the strength of the Jewish people comes from, just look around this room. L'chaim, you are the strength. You are the inspiration. You are my motivation. And thank you all, my friends, for being here with us. And let's talk a little bit now about the message. Because the message, as you can see on the screen for today, is the darkness of division. Notice that, thank God, we haven't had load shedding in a while. Thank God, right? We don't want to jinx it. Chief Rabbi Harris used to say, us Jews, we don't believe in superstition. So we're not going to jinx that. But there are two messages I want to convey, okay? And that we can learn from the plague of darkness, because darkness is not just a plague that happened in Egypt back then. You know, we as a Jewish people know there's no word in Hebrew for history. How do you say history in Hebrew? Huh? How do you say history in Hebrew? God, right? Historia. But my, oh shoot, my friend. It looks like the Historia. Yeah, Historia is not a. It's an English. It's a Hebrew-sized word from English. Okay, there's no word. I mean, Historia is not original Hebrew, right? In Hebrew, you perhaps would say zikaron, which is memory. Okay, and there's me in it. We are part of the memory. Each of us is part of the story. So while it's true that there was a plague of darkness, and the Torah gives us the historical facts, but that reminds me of another good old joke I've told you before. This guy comes into me, a couple who I married off a couple of years back. I've been doing weddings for the last 15 years here. Not as many lately. But this couple, they came to me for some therapy afterwards. I'm cheaper than the therapist because I don't charge anything. So they come for free therapy. Anyways, in the middle of this meeting, the young man looks at me and says, Rabbi, it's unbelievable. Anytime I do anything wrong, my wife gets hysterical with me. I said, you mean hysterical? He says, Rabbi, I could speak English. Please don't correct me. And he says, every time I do something wrong, she brings up the whole history of everything I've done wrong. Historical. So my friends, the lessons and messages are not just historical. They are messages for life, okay? And the first element I wanted to look at with you today is that we remember we're never completely in the dark. We're never doomed. We're never lost, okay? And the other point is that true darkness is when we fail to see each other. They're both relevant points and messages that I think you all want to hear and discuss in a seniors club. I think these are important messages that we have to apply in our lives. And so when we talk about darkness, I'm going to break up the class as follows. We might do one part today and continue with another part tomorrow, and then Wednesday discuss something else. But I want to just look a little bit on the technical side, explore the plague. First, try to understand what made this plague different from the previous plagues. For example, in today's Torah portion, we read about the plague of locusts, okay? The locusts, in today's Chumash, when I was reading it this morning, it says it covered the skies and made it very dark, a little cloudy outside. Hopefully it's not a plague of locusts, okay? But there was darkness in that plague too. So we'll have to understand what was unique about the plague of darkness. What made it, the Torah describes it, made it physically impossible to move. When we have load shedding, at least you could turn on your light on your phone or a torch. What was unique about the plague of darkness? It wasn't just about load shedding. Absolutely. There's an oblivion. And let me tell you, that darkness still exists. When we can't feel the pain of others, when we can't be empathetic and sympathetic and feel another person's struggle, when people are apathetic, then unfortunately we got problems. And that's why I feel it's important to talk about it. I know I'm preaching to the choir because you are empathetic and you are sympathetic and you are feeling for others. But I think if we highlight and emphasize it, we could all learn good lessons from it. And then I want to expand the conversation a little bit beyond that about the character of darkness, okay? And we'll look at some famous perspectives about the nature of darkness, okay? Is darkness just the absence of light, or is darkness an independent entity? Don't answer me right now, we'll talk about it. And drawing from this debate, there are various opinions that I want to look at. So we'll take your opinions, but I'll also share with you some opinions of the sages that could help us understand what made the plague of darkness so unique for its time, and how darkness can be understood not just as the absence of light, but that the darkness was an active creation, that the sages tell us it stifled movement, but I want to look at how that applies to us. Because when people are in a dark place, and people get there, unfortunately, when they don't have friends and nobody reaches out, and there are people who used to come to our shir, some of them who I reach out to from time to time, others who perhaps I've forgotten to reach out to. I'm going to give you all homework today, okay? And the homework I'm going to tell you right now is to pick up the phone and call a friend. Call somebody you haven't been in touch with in a while. Check up on them. And let me tell you, it won't only be good for them, it will be very good for you too. And the more you could do this, the better it could be for you and for them. Because there are people in darkness. There are people who don't have anybody reaching out to them, who don't have friendships, who don't have a social life. And for whatever reason, maybe they can't go out or choose not to go out. You could be there for them. You could be their beacon of light. And I encourage you to. And then we could unpack this idea and realize the fact that the Torah singles out the plague of darkness in the sense that it makes it so unique that even the Jews, what does it say in the Torah? Ulachol Yisrael, for the Jewish people, haya'or b'mashvaisam, there was light in their homes. What does that mean? It doesn't say that by the other plagues that the Jews were exempt or the Jews had something different. What does it mean that they had light? And how could we each be beacons of light? Because you are a walking lamplighter, my friends. Each of us are beams of light, so bright that sometimes I need sunglasses to come in here. But let's talk about how we could all be and keep that bright light that each of us has and make sure to spread it. And therefore, my friends, realizing that when we are light, in the sense that we can change no matter how bad things are. And sometimes we wake up and we feel, you ever wake up and you feel like it's just dark and getting darker, like you're in a tunnel? I don't know what causes it. I guess we all have those moments. Okay, so you don't have to be bipolar or schizophrenic, or we all are. I always ask for a group discount wherever I go. They ask what group. I say, you don't have any personalities in here. So, my friends, condition and no condition, we all sometimes have moments of darkness, and we have also the light. In fact, next week, I want to learn with you a mimer from the Rebbe Bassi Lagani. We're going to spend a little bit of time learning that discourse from the Rebbe's teaching. Powerful discourse. It's a message that King Solomon says this world is God's garden. A jungle to us, doesn't it? But in the garden, there are beautiful flowers. This is the seed to see them. I mean, we're blessed with a beautiful garden. Maybe one of these days we could do a little tea party in my garden and see the roses and the other beautiful. And now it's easier for you to come to my garden because in the past, it was a little bit bumpy. We paved the way into the garden to make it easier for you. So please God, one of these days we could do that. And why am I saying this? Because sometimes the garden has weeds. Sometimes the garden has schmutz, dirt. And what we have to realize is that each of us are the gardeners. We tend to the garden. And where you see schmutz and weed and problems, we could fix it. You could clean it. I saw Helen Zilla was this week. I guess she's running for mayor of Joburg. So she's trying to score some points. So she was doing a cleanup in Ramberg. You saw it? And what's interesting is the TV channel that was doing this video interviewed one of the residents. And it was something shocking. He said, we see well-dressed people. Maybe they live in Santon. I hope it's not people from Santon, but either way. Who throw garbage on the floor in Ramberg. But they would never do that outside their home in Santon. God forbid. And the point was, you don't want your street to be dirty. Don't make someone else's street dirty. I remember when I was in camp as a kid, you know what the lifeguard announced? He said, I don't urinate in your, he said, I don't swim in your toilet. Please don't urinate in my pool. It's someone else's space. Let's be respectful of it. It's shocking to hear what this guy said. That people who in their own neighborhood won't make a mess because they want to live in a clean area, why are they making a mess in someone else's neighborhood? The whole world is God's garden, but the garden needs gardeners. The garden needs people to maintain it, to clean it, to look after it, to make sure that the beautiful plants and flowers can prosper, can grow, can blossom, can bloom. And so we're going to look at this plague of darkness and see where the darkness exists and how we could bring more light into the world around us. And that's how we could see better. You need light to see. So we have to see the problems of others, and that's how we could all be light and we could see the world in a better way. So That's our topic for discussion today. And I know you might be thinking Pesach is still some time away. It's not so far, by the way. We're 10 weeks to Pesach. Exactly 10 weeks from tomorrow is Bedikas Chametz. All right, so it's not so far away. Sorry to scare you, but that's the reality. Okay? Now, I know some people in this room have confided in me that they already started their Pesach cleaning. Not a bad idea. I should probably start doing that too. Okay, it's a Jewish thing. When you get a little bored, do some cleanup. Find all the clutter, things we were hoarding in our homes that perhaps we don't really need. Waste of money that we even bought those things in the first place. And that's a good time to start cleaning up a bit, declutter. In fact, there's a wonderful group. Where did Chaim go? Chaim Cohen's daughter started a WhatsApp group, or maybe it's a Facebook group, called Declutter Joburg. And the idea behind that group is perhaps you're doing some cleanup at home, decluttering. My wife was doing it recently. She said, our youngest kid is 5. At the moment, we don't have any infants. If we're going to get a new infant soon, we'll buy the kid some new clothing. No need for us to keep, all that baby clothes in the house. And she put it on the group, and there are people who needed. We have staff here who recently had babies, gave it to them, and share it with others. It doesn't need to occupy more space in our house. By the time we have grandkids in a couple of years, please God, I'm sure there'll be new fashions. And my grandchildren don't want to be in the 2020s outfits. No, that's outdated. So Pesach, it's still a little bit of time away. But for those of us who like to be prepared, certainly while we look at the story, it's good for us to get prepared in a good way, okay? And to look at the story, because it's in our parsha this week. And, there's some people that have like the DIY stuff, okay? You could go to Martha Stewart's website and find actual instructions for making a bag of plagues. You could get plastic toy frogs. You could get the sunglasses to recreate the darkness that we're going to talk about today. You could get all kinds of shtick out there that your Seder could be very meaningful. In fact, we're going to spend time over the next couple of weeks preparing and talking about how to make Pesach meaningful and purposeful. And it's a good time to do that while the Torah portions are talking about it now. Say, how do I want to make my Seder this year better, more fun? First of all, you have to get a nice Haggadah. Why do we get a good Haggadah? So we could say the right words. But while some people might, in fact, avoid thinking about Pesach or the massive, biblically proportioned destruction that's occasioned by the plagues. In fact, some people don't like talking about that. It's not pleasant to talk about the downfall of our enemy, right? Some people enjoy tzigazund. I'm just thinking of another one. Next time you get a delivery from Take-A-Lot or wherever, save those little balls, those little not the bubble wrap. I'm talking about like little ping pong balls. You could throw them around like hail. Either way, each of the plagues you could reenact them. But where does the fascination with the plagues come from? I know it's an interesting story. And certainly, who was the one? Somebody was telling me the other day that she doesn't really believe the story happened. Didn't it happen? But it's certainly fun. So it's like Gesundheit. You're going to start denying history, whether you believe it or not. If the Torah tells me, I believe it's historical. But again, I don't think it's only about the history. I think it's about our story. I think we're also smitten with these plagues. Like the one we're talking about, darkness. How often we're stuck in darkness, even if there's no load shedding. Okay. So besides the fact that the plagues are an extraordinarily colorful and evocative component of the Exodus story and make it more fun. And it's a great way to engage the younger attendees at our Seder. All right. Even the young at heart. It makes it more fun. One of the fun things I like doing for my communal Seder is making props that are fun for people to engage in. But unlike some elements of the Seder that were explicitly designed to keep the kids asking questions, like dipping twice, the karpas and salt water and the maror and the charosas, and the different aspects of what we do at our Seder, because we want to engage our kids and make it interesting. which is a reminder to us that Judaism should not be boring. Make it interesting. Make it fun. This week, some of the shuls had leke brachas, so that you can come back to shul more engaged and connect and network. We're starting a new thing in our shul called social. We want people to be more socially connected. So social. Whatever it is, sushi. Judaism should be interesting. And that's the job of the rabbis in the community, to make sure that Judaism doesn't become irrelevant. Because we look at the same story, but we have to find its relevance to us in our life. But I think we have to also look at the story. And let's start with a verse in the Torah. Okay, I want to start. Let me just see. But here we go. Sorry. There's something going on the screen. It tells me your class is being live streamed, but what it's doing here is it's not letting you see the screen so that you can see the texts. I think I just messed it up. What did I just do? Is everybody seeing? I don't have eyes behind me, so I don't want to look backwards. But what are you seeing on the screen? Sorry to those who are joining us virtually. I see the virtual screen is fine. It's the in-house screen that has some problem. So give me a second here to see what the problem is. Why is it giving us trouble? All of a sudden, eh? But the in-house screen is the online screen is good. It's the in-house screen that's giving trouble. Give me a second. Sorry, everyone online, the screen is just going to disappear for a second. I see that we're live streamed. Thank you very much. Now let's try that. Are we good? Can you see the story here? I want to just go back. Okay. Final three. Okay, here we go. Hold on a second. Okay. Is it good? No. Yes. Okay, good. Let's try to keep it this way. Okay, so the first point I wanted to look at was the Torah's message here, that the parsha starts off with, Hashem says to Moshe, Bo el Paro. So I'll ask you again, what does Bo mean? Not go to Pharaoh, but come to Pharaoh. Because Hashem is going with them. Wherever they go, God's going with them. The same message to us. Come to Pharaoh. But let's look at the next words. Because I have hardened his heart. V'leiv kalavadav, and the hearts of all of his servants. Why? It's very important. In order that I may place these signs of mine in his midst. And now, let me give you the next words. You didn't hear this morning in shul, even though it's a Monday morning, because this morning we learned Rosh Chodesh, not the Torah portion of the week. So I'm giving you a taste of it now. And in order to saper, that you should relate, you should tell over the story. Be'oznei bincha uva mincha, in the ears of, it's not just enough, they have to hear it and perceive it, of your children and your grandchildren. Asher isalalti b'Mitzrayim, of what I did, how I made a mockery of Egypt, and all the signs and wonders that I did before them, v'yidatem k'ani Hashem, and you will know that I am Hashem. So alongside the obvious aim of the plagues, which was the punishment of Pharaoh and his people for refusing to release the Jewish people from their slavery. And we can talk about slavery too. Slavery has been abolished in all parts of the world. Although sometimes I wonder if we pay our staff enough, or is it because I was telling an American friend of mine how much we pay our staff. And I know I pay my staff double what someone else told me they pay their staff. And I said, how do you get away with paying so little? I feel embarrassed. And she said to me, listen, they're desperate for a job and I can't afford to pay them more. So if they're going to want, they're willing to take a job for whatever she's willing to pay them. She told me she pays her security guard who looks after her property 3,200 rand a month. I pay $5,000 to my guy for that. And he lives on the property and she doesn't even provide him food. It's his job to get food with that 3,200. And I thought that when I pay 5, it's too little. Okay. Again, I'm providing accommodation and food. And she said, so everybody does what they could. But I was telling an American friend about that. He says, you know what that converts to in dollars, especially what the dollar was not so long ago. 3,200 rand in dollars is what, less than $150 a month. It's bupkis, it's nothing. So he says to me, what are you keeping slaves there? So, God forbid, these are people working, but there's different types of salaries. Again, I think people pay what they could, and people are also willing to pay. Some people are willing to work for less because at least they have a job. Okay, but without going into the details, I do think we should be paying people menschlichly. But this lady said to me, she cannot afford to pay more. She doesn't earn more, but if this guy's willing to work for that, then fine. I believe there are labor laws, and as long as it's going along and according with that, even the minimum pay in South Africa is far less than the minimum pay in Europe, Australia, America, and other parts of the world. So again, it's all relevant and relative to where you are. Where is I going to with this? Slavery. In actual fact, slavery is not just something that happened long ago in Egypt. I would say in some ways, we might be slaves to ourselves, to our habits, to our behaviors, to certain things. We become slaves. People have addictions. Some people are slaves to their food. Some people are slaves to, I don't know, anybody want to give an example while I look for another charger here? Because this charger is going to turn my computer off in a second. What are you a slave to? Okay, you don't have to say what you're a slave to. Tell us what your husband's a slave to. Cigarettes. Okay, so at least you're aware. Working hard. People work hard, yeah, and they're slaves to their job. People are slaves to their work. It's true. But what else? Anyone want to share what they might be a slave to? Somebody want to call Vusi. I need him to bring me a charger, or else the computer's going to crash in a second. I don't have a charger. The computer's turning off, and I don't want to lose the shear because then we're not going to have any more shear for the rest of the day. I mean, we'll have, just not on the screen. So if somebody could get Vusi to bring me a charging device, otherwise we're in trouble here. Sorry, everybody. Give me a second. Okay, so what are you a slave to? Technology? Anyone a slave to technology? To your phone. You know why it's called a cell phone? Because like a jail cell, no? Like we're enslaved to it, yeah? What else? What else are people slave to? Wine. Whining, you mean? But it's true. There are people who are slaves to their alcohol. Every year I wind up telling you a story. I'm not going to tell it to you today because I'm saving it for before Pesach. But every year before Pesach, I usually tell a story about a certain fellow who was a slave to his habit, to his addiction of drinking. And unfortunately, that's a story that many people are, there are people who are slaves to their habits, to their addictions, to their drinking, right? It's unfortunately true. People, so I want to say is slavery is not just something that happened back then in Egypt. Slavery is something that is still pertinent today. Yes. Okay, so as long as you understand and agree and appreciate that point, then we could go into our next point. But right now, I'm just trying to get this computer charging, and it seems like, oh, it's working. Good. Now the question is how I get the screen back on for you. Okay, going to be on in a second. Okay, finally it worked. Let's see. Oh, where's Vusi? One works, then the other doesn't work. I have a feeling in this this piece that Vusi, this only one side is working. Have you not got another piece? Meaning, when I had it on this side, when this was here, this turns on, but then I can't charge my computer. And then I can't teach without the computer. And if it's this side, then this is not working. So maybe we have another piece. Well, let's go back to the previous one. Okay. In the meantime, Vusi is going to get the piece. No worries. Don't excuse yourselves, because just as a general rule, everybody, don't excuse yourself. Come, go. Otherwise, it interrupts the flow of the shir. Okay. Thank you. It's good to see you already. But I'm just going to say that to everybody every day. If you have to go in the middle of the shir, it's more disruptive excusing yourself than, and I understand you don't want to be rude, but it's more disruptive to excuse yourself than it is to just go. We don't take attendance here. Don't worry about that. Go when you want, come when you want, but it's just more disruptive to do it that way. So thank you for your understanding, and I appreciate the sentiment in doing it in a way that's less disruptive, but that turns out to be more disruptive. Okay, let's put it in here. And maybe just every day, just make sure it's set up properly so we don't go through that again. Thank you. Let's see. Okay, and now apologies to all our online participants and everybody else while we try to get this sorted. Is it not working? Now this isn't working either. Oh, is it? Okay, it's back. Just make sure. The main thing, I have to get the computer charging. There we go. Okay, so I think we figured out the problem is that this piece doesn't, only one side works of it. Okay, now we're back. Okay, online participants, I'm back. Could you see me? Thank you. All right. Any questions while we're at it? So we were talking about slavery, and we're all slaves to one thing or another, and that was the point. But Hashem says to know God, and God created each of us with our ability to choose. We have free will. And with free will means that we can change. We're not stuck in our position of slavery. Okay, and that's why we said one of the ideas we celebrate when Pesach comes each year. Tell your children, tell your grandchildren, you are not stuck how you are. The other day, one of the seniors said to me, "You can't teach an old dog new tricks." I said, "It's true, but you're not a dog." "Okay, you want to tell me you're old? Fine." She says, "I'm a dinosaur." Fine. If you're a dinosaur, no problem. But you're not a dog. An old dog can't learn new tricks. Even your dog learns new tricks. Did you hear about the fellow on the boat? There was a magician, and this magician every day on the boat, he would just repeat. It's new customers. They would get new people on the cruise, and every day a different show. But some rabbis I think are very lucky. Everybody loves. I won't say which rabbis now, because some of them are my best rabbis. But I feel like they're a little bit luckier than me. I have to come up with new, fresh material every day. Fine, not every day. You seniors are a little bit more forgiving of me. But in my shul, they tell me, "You told us that story last year." A rabbi could repeat a joke only once in 10 years because everybody remembers the joke. The story, you got to maybe once every 5 years because by then they already forgot some details. But the vart I can repeat 3 times in the same speech. Nobody remembers the vart, the inspiration. Somehow people remember the joke. But the joke was just to get you engaged. Anyways, I look at some of the great rabbis on the speaking circuit. They go around, they share the same speech everywhere they go. They perfect that speech. Even comedians, they can use the same show. Yeah, and you laugh. Yeah, the guy said the joke 150 million times. He gets because you hear the joke once, you laugh. But if he were to tell you the joke again tomorrow, you got mashugah. So me, as a rabbi, I have congregants coming every day, and I have to now come up with fresh material. He, as a comedian, or the other rabbi, he can repeat his speech. Anyways, this trickster, this magician was lucky because every day he could repeat the same show. He had a different audience. But the only thing that wasn't different was the captain's parrot. The captain who was, steering the boat. You want to just put it on silent? Thank you. The captain who was steering the boat had this parrot, and the parrot watched the trick every day, and now started ruining the jokes, the tricks. So, he's hiding the rope there. Oh, he has a rabbit in the hat. Oh, he put it in his hand. Oh, it's in the sleeve. He's getting sick of the parrot. So one day the boat crashes into an iceberg, and the parrot's quiet. And finally the parrot turns, "Okay, tell me, where did you hide the boat?" Why was I saying that? I don't even remember. Okay, the point here is all the wonders and miracles that God performs. And, alongside the obvious reason for all these plagues, which is punishing the Egyptians and Pharaoh for their persecution and enslavement and all the other things that they did to the Jewish people. But the 10 plagues, they had another, and I want to use a word that I'm remembering from my course. There's 2 terms when it comes to education. One is pedagogical, and the other is there's pedagogy. Maybe I'm mispronouncing the words. You're going to have to correct me. And the other is andragogy. It sounds like I'm making up words here, doesn't it? No? Pedagogy is the way you teach children. Andragogy is the way you teach adults. And I think even adults sometimes prefer the pedagogical way. It's more fun. It's more interesting. Andragogy is boring. It's like its own name, But what's the pedagogy here? To know God, to understand God's illustrating something. So I want to say, besides for the historical aspect, I like to look at the lessons and to analyze the effects of darkness and to understand what it all means, how its relevance is for each of us. So when we look at our parsha, it's not the beginning of the Exodus story, right? Moshe arrived on the scene some time ago, and the emancipation of the Jewish people was already set into motion, which is another powerful message to me that I want to share with you. How old was Moshe when he took on this position of leadership of the Jewish people? He was no longer excuse me for saying this, he wasn't a young man. Okay, fine, he was a young man. He was 80 years old. 80. What do you say, Jill? Is 80 young or old? It's old. How dare you say young? Thank you. It depends where you stand. In one room, we have a difference of opinion. Is 80 young or old? Okay, stay young. Stay young at 80. There we go. Stay young. Okay, but last week we yes. Oh, okay. You remind me of I came to a law firm the other day, had to discuss something. And the law firm was called O'Donnell, Murphy, and Cohen. I come inside, I ask for Mr. Cohen. They say, yeah, he's the only one here. O'Donnell and Murphy are on the golf course. They hardly ever come in. So I asked Mr. Cohen, why is it called O'Donnell, Murphy, and Cohen if you're the only one in? He says, because all my clients read from right to left. I have no more jokes for today. You can go back to sleep. I'm just joking. Anyways, last week we read about the first 7 plagues, right? This week we are going to read about the last 3 plagues and the Korban Pesach, which we're going to talk about, and our actual departure from Egypt land. How does that song go? Moses, Moses. No, anybody know? Something way back in Egypt land. Let my people go. So today we don't say let my people go. Let my people know. And when we look at each of these stories of the plagues, I think I'm all over the place today. I'm like talking to this and that and the other. Should I just focus on one thing? I can't do that with all my ADD, HD, PQ, I don't speak. Okay. So let's focus. Since you want me to focus, I want to look at today's Chumash portion. Today's portion talks about the plague of locusts. I'm going to start there because today is today. So I couldn't prepare for you tomorrow, and we're still looking at today. Let's read the verse today. Vayal ha'arba akol eretz Mitzrayim. Now it's blocked here on my side. Okay. Oy, oy, oy. Let's leave it. Vayal ha'arba al kol eretz Mitzrayim. The verse says the locusts ascended over the entire land of Egypt. Very good. Vayonach b'chol gvul Mitzrayim, and they rested within all the borders of Egypt. Koved ma'od, it was very severe. Lefan of lo'hayachein. Before them, there was never such a plague like the locust. V'acharav lo'yachein. And God says that even after this, there will never be a plague like the locusts again. All right? Vayichas es ein kol ha'aretz v'techashach ha'aretz. They obscured the view of all the earth, and the earth became darkened. Very good. You're following along? But that's a key word, darkened. This is not the plague of darkness. Which plague is this? Number 8, which is locusts. Vayaychal es kol esav ha'aretz v'es kol pri eitz asher hoisir abarad. And they ate all the vegetation of the earth and all the fruit of the trees which the hail had left over. And the verse continues, and there was no greenery that was left in the trees or in the vegetation of the fields throughout the entire land of Egypt. So God said to Moses, stretch forth your hand towards the heavens. Now we go to the 9th plague, also in today's portion. And there will be darkness over the whole land of Egypt. And the darkness will become darker. So Moses stretched forth his hand towards the heavens.
And what happens? And there was this thick darkness over the entire land of Egypt for 3 days. Listen to these words or read them on the screen. The darkness was so intense that one person cannot see the other. And no one rose from their place for 3 days. And then this verse, also very powerful. But for all of the children of Israel, there was light in their dwellings. We have to unpack this plague. Today's Chumash portion, you read it, you're learning your chitas now. The horror, the devastation that was brought by the locusts, we understand, what happened. But the Torah takes it a step further. This is like the penultimate plague, the anticlimactic, you could say. Everything went dark. The lights went out. A whole week of load shedding. We're used to that. We know what it's like. Okay? Obviously, this must have been a little concerning for them back then. Certainly disorientating. But compared with the plagues before, which inflicted damage, darkness doesn't seem to have the same effect. Although I think we all know how inconvenient it is when you can't charge up your phone because of load shedding. When then your spear lights go out, but you could put in solar panels, and then you're spared from this plague. No. And the truth is, we're not the only ones. There are people who live in places like the Arctic Circle, and that have to put up with darkness 6 months of the year, 8 months of the year. It's not so bad in South Africa, hey? So when we look at these two plagues, which both come in today's portion, locusts and darkness, both of these plagues have darkness elements within them, okay? Because if you go back to the verse here, the verse says that when there was a swarm of locusts, it was so thick that it obscured the view of all the earth. You see it there? So it blocked out the sun. It felt like London, like Joburg felt that way this morning. The earth became darkened. So not only does the plague of darkness not seem to have been as bad, we're familiar with it. We have right here in Joburg, these kinds of experiences all the time. What's the big deal about the plague of darkness? All right? That's our question. What are we missing here? What was so different about the plague of darkness? So we know that whenever you study Torah, there's a great sage, a commentary. His name is Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki. You might be familiar with a wine called Rashi. Rashi wine is made by my cousin. And in fact, Andrea, who's going to do your art with you this afternoon at 1:30 p.m. till 3 p.m., Andrea was just in Israel and stayed by my cousin's home. They got lots of Rashi wine. The Rashi wines were dedicated to my great-grandfather, of whom the Rebbe used to say, Rashi say l'chaim, zag l'chaim. Why? Because his name is Reb Shmuel Yitzchak. So it's an acronym of Rashi. And Rashi was called the wine of Torah. In a depth, Rashi, needed to make a living, and he had a winery, Rashi winery. Yeah, he was a sommelier, a butler. So Rashi addresses this question. Let's read Rashi. You see Rashi on the top? Rashi says, what does it mean by Yamash Choshech? The darkness became darker. He says the words, it seems like Hebrew got stuck out of there. Because you see, I had Hebrew on my screen earlier and it disappeared. The word Vayamesh Choshech, he says it signifies that the darkness will become darker upon them than the darkness of night. And the darkness of night will become even darker. You hear this? Now, does load shedding make a difference to you if it's day or night? I guess it may make it makes a difference, because if you could open your shade, you could open your curtain, and at least you have some light coming in. At night, it's even more problematic. Our homes become very dark. And even without load shedding, sometimes in our neighborhood, there's darkness. So according to this, God's instruction to Moshe to make the darkness darkness was not just a redundancy or a convoluted way of saying make it dark. Right? Although we'll soon see there are other ways to interpret this expression. But Rashi explains that it means that darkness itself will become darker. So that the darkness of the plague was somehow darker than the ordinary dark of night. You know, in the Torah where it talks about the curses in Parshas Kisava, talks about the curses that will befall the Jewish people if, God forbid, we don't follow the instructions of the Torah. And one of the curses there is that the Torah says, I'm forgetting the verse exactly, but you will be like a blind person in the dark, groping in the dark. I mean, to be blind and in the dark, I guess it's not bad enough if a person can't see. Why does the Torah now go on to say, like a blind person groping in the dark? And one of the commentators says that he once saw a certain person who was visually impaired, and he was carrying a torch. So he asks him, why are you carrying a torch? You can't even see. So what does it help you carrying a torch? And he says, because when I walk with a torch, at least others can see me. So this is the way Rabbi Yossi interpreted when the Torah says that like a blind person groping in the dark. It's even worse when nobody could see you. But I'm going to get to that, because I think sometimes people are blind to each other. That's why Helen Keller said, if only for one day, the seeing people could be blind. Because sometimes we're not in tune with the challenges of others. My daughter was just in Israel and went to the Deaf Museum. Remember I told you previously about the blind museum that I've been to called Dialogue in the Dark? It's an incredible experience that I encourage everybody to do. If you go to Israel or when it comes back here, I did it in New York, unbelievable experience, which I've discussed with you previously. My daughter went to the Deaf Museum. And you come into this place and you can't hear anything. I don't know exactly how they've done it, but I'm going to put it on my, have you been there, Russ? But you know what? Yesterday, somebody was at my dinner table and he put on his noise canceling headphones. He said he thought it would annoy his wife. It even looked like it, but he couldn't hear her say a thing. Yeah. Anyways, what's Rashi's point? Rashi's saying the ninth plague wasn't just a watered down version of the locust that was also darkness. Okay, and then there wouldn't be a point, because then the day was also turned into night. This was darker than a regular night, because an intensified darkness that had the naming rights of all the other plagues, that this is darker than dark, even darker than the previous plague of locusts. But what is the quantitative difference of being even darker? What does it mean? What's the idea? Was it just darker? What's the meaning behind all this? Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to, how does it go? Yeah. Sing to you again. La, da, 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 da. I don't know the words to songs. I make them up. So I don't know if you want to hear my version of it. Sound of silence. No, that's not the way it goes. The sound of silence. All right, I'll turn to my friend Simon and Garfinkel, and I'll ask them to come sing it for you. So the key to understanding the true nature of this plague is not in God's command to Moshe that about the darkness, but in the Torah's description of the plague as it happened, and what the Torah says. The darkness was so severe that no one rose from this place for 3 days. What does that mean? That no person could rise from the place for 3 days? How did it impede their movements? We know load shedding. You can move around during load shedding. In fact, in the car, there's more light than in the house. So we go for drives. What's the meaning of this? So there's other commentaries, as you can see on the screen, that we're going to look at here. Now let's look at the Ibn Ezra first. The Ibn Ezra says, like, what does it mean that no person rose from their place? He says, mi beisai, from their home. At least in load shedding, you could go out of your house and drive the car. They couldn't go out. And, he uses an example. He says, as in every man remained in his place, for where could they go without light? Where could you go without light? Now, obviously, he has a different interpretation than Rashi, that the reason the Egyptians were housebound for the duration of the darkness wasn't just because of the dark and lack of light, but rather when the Torah says no one rose from their place, he understands it literally. Nobody could move. In fact, Rashi looks at that. He says the darkness was so thick for 3 days, thick darkness in which they didn't see each other for those 3 days, and another 3 days of darkness that was even darker than this, that nobody rose from their place. If they were sitting, they were unable to stand. And if they were standing, they were unable to sit. They were like a Madame Tussauds, stuck in their, you know, those guys on the street corner, you know, they dress in gold and they're like, you have to put a few rands in, then they move. But what is it? So according to Rashi, that was keeping the Egyptians frozen in their places. They weren't just unwilling, they were unable to move. They weren't able to move. It seems like the darkness itself was keeping them there. So why and how was that the case? Why were they so stuck in the darkness? And why 3 days? Very good point. Very good point. So we got a couple of more minutes left for today's shiur. Make it 15 minutes, and then there's a delectable lunch waiting for you. Let's understand this. The nature of the plague of darkness. What is the nature of darkness? What's so different about the plague of darkness over the other plagues? Okay? And we have to understand what the nature of darkness is itself. At first blush, there doesn't seem to be much to discuss. Was it darkness? What is darkness? You know, just as cold is produced by the absence of movement and heat, or as ignorance is the lack of knowledge. On that note, 2 points come to my mind. The first one is, I asked my teacher the other day, what's the difference between ignorance and apathy? You know what he said to me? I don't know, and I don't care. Just true, isn't it? But I think there's another point here that's very relevant to us all. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Thank you very much. Okay? So let's understand this point, because the issue isn't just about, it's not as straightforward as it seems. And historically speaking, it's been a matter of contention, of discussion. There's a French philosopher, Jean-Paul Sartre, who famously claimed that a void, the lack of a thing, can be considered a thing in and of itself. So is darkness an entity, or is darkness just the absence of light? Which one is it? When something you have been expecting fails to appear, right? You might have an acute, palpable awareness of its absence. That's why they say Sartre was sitting in the cafe one fine morning in Paris, and he's working on his draft of Being and Nothingness. He asked his waitress, I'd like a cup of coffee, please, with no cream. And the waitress replied, I'm sorry, monsieur, but we're out of cream. How's about with no milk? Reminds me of Molly. I used to ask her, I'd come here, do you remember Molly? She used to run our coffee shop. Soon we're going to have a nice new fresh coffee shop for you. So I used to ask Molly, I would say, Molly, can I have a mochaccino? She says, no, we're out of mocha. So I said, okay, can I have this? No, we're out. So I'm like, she says, we don't have any of them. The only thing I could give you is coffee with milk. It was funny the way she did it. Anyway, the point I'm making is treating nothing as a thing in its own right is an idea of ancient origin. And in early times, there were some thinkers who took this idea quite literally. Right? Some of the ancient philosophers believed that things we sometimes consider to just be absences actually had substances of their own. You hear this? So it's not just a lack of something, right? It's not just that we're out of cream. Can I instead give you no milk? In one of Plato's dialogues, a member of the Pythagorean school claims that both fog and darkness are made of some sort of condensed air. And even earlier, a different philosopher, what was his name? Herculetus. He described darkness as a form of vapor. And even more recently, in the 19th century, there was a German thinker and writer. What's the noise? Guth. And Guth considered darkness to be an entity in itself. It's an integral ingredient in generating color. The darkness is a color. So interestingly, this subject is also a matter of debate in Jewish thought. Is darkness the lack of light, or is it an independent entity? We are. Okay, but let me share with you where this applies in halacha. This is the question we're asking. Is darkness an entity in itself, or is it the absence of light? Do you hear the question? So here is the discussion point. We know every morning we have to say Shema. Yes? So here is a verse. What is darkness? So we have a verse, the prophet Isaiah says, Yoitzer ur uvarech choshech. Sorry, I didn't put it in here. That God forms light and creates darkness. Oiseh shalom, he makes peace. Uvares hakol, and he creates everything. Okay? Says the prophet Isaiah, Oiseh shalom, God makes peace. Uvayre ra, and God creates evil. Ani Hashem oiseh kolela, I am God who makes all of these. God makes them all. Good, bad, ugly, it all comes from the same source. Now, of course, Judaism rejects the notion of some God of darkness. It's not a different God, okay? Or the darkness and evil has any sort of independent, autonomous power. God created everything, right? And there's nothing to debate about that. It's all from the same source, from Hashem. But the prophet's statement is still curious. And so the Ibn Ezra explains it as a matter of linguistics, okay? He says that what does this mean? That darkness is not a creation of its own, but it's just the absence of light. Yoitzer, when we say this verse, Yoitzer or that God forms and creates light, he says the verse is mentioning two opposites. And creates darkness. The word creates here, he says, means decreasing it into being, for darkness is nothing. It's simply the absence of light. So which one is it? Is darkness the absence of light, or is absence an entity of its own? If we say that God creates light and God creates darkness, it seems that darkness is an entity of its own. But if Ibn Ezra is saying that darkness is just the absence of light, then which one is it? So here's another Talmudic discussion about this matter. The Talmud says, which means when God created this world, God called the light day, and the darkness God called what? Night. Hachikama, this is the meaning. The merciful one summoned the light and appointed it for the duty of day. And he summoned the darkness and appointed it to the duty of night. Very simple. So clearly the Talmud envisions darkness as a unique entity that can be summoned to rule or to serve. And as its time period, so if you're in the Arctic areas, then you got more darkness. If you're here, you get more light. But there's another commentary here, Nachmanides, okay? We're going to look at Nachmanides in a second. The truth is I want to look at one more commentary, Rabbi Tzvi Mecklenburg. And he had a different way of seeing this. He said, when God said it was good by the light, right? So he says the reality is not like the view of those who argue that darkness is simply the absence of light. Rather, darkness is a unique creation, albeit not as much discernibly positive one. So the verse does not state it was good with regard to the creation of darkness, even though it has a utility. What's the utility of darkness in your mind? What's the benefit of darkness? I'm asking the benefit, not the detriment. What's the good about darkness? No benefit? Let me ask you, do you sleep better in the dark or in the light? It's better for you to sleep, right? But the fact of the matter is that the positive is not as readily discernible, which is why you don't see it that way. So we understand that our understanding, the plague of darkness is that darkness itself seems to be not something good, even though we all agree that we all need time to rest. Because without rest, what happens to us? We get tired. We become chatful. We get jaded. We get burnt out. That's what happens. We get exhausted. So understanding darkness as no more than the negation of light would seem to have this, to create an anomaly in the story of the 10 plagues. Because every one of the plagues preceding darkness constituted a specific substantial phenomenon that produced the purpose of that plague. There was blood. All the water of Egypt turned into blood. It itself seemed to have some effect on the Egyptians. And the frogs croaking here, there, and everywhere. You know, when we bought our house, some of you have been to our home. We got it just over 2 years ago. For 7 years, our house was vacant before we moved in. It was sold to us as a knock me down. We took a knock me down, and thank God we're happy in it. It's an old house. It was built in the 1940s. It hasn't changed all that much since. And the people before us moved out 7 years before we moved in. In between, they rented it out once or twice. It didn't work out. When we came in, there was dust this thick. But to top it off, the swimming pool was filthy. It was green and black and murky and schmutzik. By the way, if you come to swim in my pool, I need to tell you, I never emptied the water out. Eventually, my wife put in enough chlorine and chemicals and this, that, and the other. Color looks good today. It's no longer black and green, except for after a rain. But you don't want to drink that water because it didn't look very healthy. Now it looks better, but it's coloring that makes it look good. But somehow it's clear today. We filtered it, but we never changed the water. But something I never picked up until we moved into the house, because we only checked the house out during the day. All of a sudden, we move into the house, and every night I'm hearing this croaking. For a few nights, I can't believe I tolerated it for so long. But after a few months, my kids went fishing in the pool and got all those frogs out. Our pool had frogs. And I got an appreciation and understanding of the plague of frogs, how annoying it was when every night these frogs, gosh, they croaked away. So I understood that was a serious plague, the frogs, okay? Every plague had a purpose. And each time God could command Moshe or Aaron to raise their hand and a staff to the heavens or over the water, depending on each case, and summon forth something to afflict the Egyptians. Every single one of these plagues had a specific, unique purpose and of what they were there for, and they afflicted the Egyptians each time. But the question we ask ourselves is, what about the darkness? If what happened was simply the absence of light, then it seems passive, right? All right. What plague was being produced? What affliction was coming upon the Egyptians? So the sun didn't rise. What was the plague, right? But yet, it seems like God told Moshe, commanded him to summon. Because if you go back to the verses we read here, what did God say? Stretch forth your hands to the heavens. Remember that verse? Why did Moshe have to do anything at all for that to happen? If darkness is just the absence of light, could have just flicked the switch, right? Deactivated the light. Brought an ESCOM to pull some tricks. What was the big deal about what was God achieving here?
So let me share with you Nachmanides. Can everybody see Nachmanides on the screen? Nachmanides was a great Spanish sage who eventually, long before the Spanish Inquisition, but after his great debate with Pablo Cristiane, who was what do you call him, an apostate Jew, Nachmanides fled to Israel, where he passed away and had a shul in Jerusalem. Very great scholar. Nachmanides says this darkness was not just the absence of sunlight, as if the sun merely set and became like nighttime. Rather, it was a deep darkness, meaning to say a thick vapor that descended from the heavens. Therefore, it says, stretch forth your hand towards the heavens to actively bring down from there a great darkness that fell upon them. So according to Nachmanides, was darkness the absence of light? No, it itself was an activated vapor that was an actual plague. And it's for this reason that they did not see each other. No one rose from their place, since otherwise they would have used candles. There's solutions like we do today. Turn on your torch and you got light. But that's not the way it worked for them. For God dispatched an active form of darkness, not merely the absence of daylight. It's possible that there was a thick, palpable cloud that had substance of sorts, as Rabbi Eliezer recounted of the Atlantic Ocean. Now, in general, Nachmanides is saying that darkness may be no more than the absence of light. Again, we could debate that, as philosophers have in the past, but we're not having that philosophical debate today. Nachmanides is saying, even if you believe that generally darkness is the absence of light, the reason Moshe stretched forth his arms to the heavens, and the reason the people couldn't see each other and couldn't even move and couldn't turn on their torches, is because this wasn't just the absence of light. This was an actual form of darkness. Now, if we're dealing with regular darkness, right, it could have affected the removal of light. So what's he calling forth? So irrespective of the nature of light and darkness, this plague was unique in the sense that this darkness subdued all light. And so the entire possibility that the sun, the moon, the stars were out as usual, but the cloud of darkness over Egypt obscured their light. Doesn't say that it was dark in Joburg. It says it was dark in Egypt. So it was a specific plague upon the Egyptians, not just the absence of light. And the Ramban applies this understanding of the plague to understand the words that the Torah uses, Vayomesh choshech, which means the darkness became darker. It was a darker form of darkness. And so he understands this, the verb form of mamash, a substance, or mimush, touching, meaning that the darkness became tangible, that you could touch the darkness. The darkness was so thick that you could touch it, he said. So when the Torah says that they could not see each other, or even they couldn't move from their place, it means they had no light to aid them in doing anything. They couldn't extinguish, they couldn't get rid of this darkness by flicking on their switch or putting on the torch. You couldn't, when I went to the Blind Museum, they didn't let you bring your phones in. You had to experience the darkness. You couldn't just put on your phone in Egypt then. And this is the point Nachmanides is saying, is that the darkness will become darker. How dark was it? Our sages say it was as thick as a dinar coin. As thick as a dinar coin, whatever that means. But Ibn Ezra talks about this. He says, over the Atlantic Ocean, there could come a thick darkness that it's impossible to differentiate between day and night. I still haven't gone on a cruise, so I can't tell you that experience. But any of you have been on a cruise where you go through this darkness, and even on the plane sometimes, right? You go into the darkness. So Nachmanides is saying that this isn't your conventional darkness where the lights turned off or where Eskom didn't let the light turn on. But he says this was a real thick form of darkness. And the Vilna Gaon says something even more. He says he would argue that the light is a creation and darkness is as well. And very simply, if you look in the Torah, it seems that God created darkness, right?
So some people say it's just the absence of light. Vilna Gaon says no. And he says darkness is a unique creature that is overridden by light. It's a creation. But you could override it with turning on light. But darkness itself is a creation. It's not the absence of light. And he says in the nature that God created and encoded, embedded in creation, that the miracle was that God changed the darkness will become even darker in Egypt. So it wasn't just darkness as in the creation of darkness that we experience at night, but rather vayamash choshech, that there was a creation, a mush. What's mush? Mush was a substance called darkness. I know lunch is calling at you, but I want to just conclude here that we see different perspectives, different opinions, and whether it was the absence of light, and most of the commentaries say no, that this was much deeper than the absence of light. There was an actual cloud of darkness, but it was such a thick darkness that it had an effect on the people themselves. And tomorrow, please God, we'll continue this discussion to understand what this darkness is and how it affects us in our own lives, because the darkness, besides for the literal darkness that they experienced then, there's a figurative darkness that we experience today, not only when it's load shedding. And so, either way, to sum up today, we understand that this was an actual plague on the Egyptians. We can understand the hysteria and the immense discomfort that came about through this plague, as the commentaries say, how it was a really harsh plague. And for those who were outdoors when the plague began, things would have been even worse. For 3 days, and possibly 6, depending on how you interpret and understand it, Egypt descended into sheer chaos, and it was a very dark, I don't even have dark enough humor to describe how dark this darkness was. And tomorrow, please God, we're going to go into the messages that can be gleaned and learned, because if darkness can wreak havoc, then how much more so can the opposite of darkness, light, bring so much goodness and greatness into the world. So tomorrow we're going to focus on the reverse of the darkness. We look forward to seeing you. Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy lunch, bingo, art, tomorrow morning, pearls at 9 a.m., and the rest of our discussions then.